What's up, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Beats by Ger. For those who don't know me, my name is Jared Harris, a musician, writer, and teacher. I play drums and manage a Toronto-based rock band, One in the Chamber, and I'm also a music journalist, having spent much of the last decade reviewing albums, live music, and interviewing artists. I primarily write for The Spill magazine. Beats by Ger is my own creative exercise to dig a little deeper into the music that I love, while examining the cultural significance behind it. I hope that this podcast can become a space to discuss records, new and old, along with highlighting particular creative eras for artists and genres as a whole. If art imitates life, I want to know why, and how is it, in return, life imitating art? How is the music we listen to shaped by the world, and how are we, in return, then shaped by said music? These are the questions at the core of Beats by Ger. Having been working on this for the better part of the last couple of months, I can't think of a better entry point into Beats by Ger than looking at the artists and albums that I couldn't get enough of in 2022. The year started with a deep dive into the massive body of work that belonged to Prince. If you know me, then you know that Prince has always been among my most favorite of artists. I've been listening to him as long as I can remember, and when he passed, I actually got the love symbol tattooed on my right forearm. I would consider Prince among the greatest songwriters, performers, musicians, and just in terms of sheer relentless talent, there are few artists who can compete. In terms of his work ethic, I don't think anyone can hold a candle. So 2022 started with a deep dive where I chose to listen to every Prince album in chronological order, back to back. It was a very long process, and it was largely inspired by author Dwayne Tudall, who has written 2 books on Prince, the first of which, Prince and the Purple Rain era studio sessions 1983 and 1984, and his most recent, Prince and the Parade and Sign of the Time era sessions 1985 and 1986. I had just finished reading the second of those around the start of 2022, and his work is incredibly detailed, incredibly thorough, using studio records, firsthand accounts from those who were working with Prince, and pulling from primary sources in different interviews at the time and those conducted more recently. He's compiled what he believes to be a day-by-day breakdown of everything Prince was working on in each studio session. And to look at it in such a context, day by day, week by week, to see him hitting the studio, making music for his next 3 records, various side projects that he's mentoring, and then also doing tour rehearsals. It was insane. If it doesn't light a fire under your ass, I don't know what will. The books are incredible, and anyone that is even a casual Prince fan will be astounded by Tudall's work. Tudall's work really inspired this entire process. His books look at how Prince went from 1999 into becoming the biggest pop sensation with the release of Purple Rain, and then how he almost immediately rejected his newfound status with Around the World in a Day, in an album that was entirely a total left turn from everything he achieved by Purple Rain, something that was almost so much of a left turn that it had to be intentional. And his following book then looks at how Parade transitions into Sign of the Times, and it's just a very interesting way to look at how an artist can change over time, and how within just a couple of years an artist can express different shades of themselves through their vision, through their artistry, through their craft. And within just 3, 4, 5 years, Prince did exactly that, while rejecting his title among the greatest, most famous pop culture figures of the time, while also chasing that and furthering that with his releases. This 5-year period between 1999 to Sign of the Times, 1982 to 1987, was absolutely crazy. Between releasing 5 studio albums, 3 of which were double albums, and then creating and starring in the Purple Rain movie, and completing work for the projects he was mentoring at the time, Apollonia, Vanity, Madhouse, and The Time. Prince achieved more in this small little window, this 5-year period, than some artists do in their lifetime. It's crazy. And to top it all off, it's considered undeniably his most creatively invigorating, most innovative era ever. Quantity and quality unmatched. It was because of Tudal that I wanted to start off the year by listening to each of Prince's albums chronologically, just to hear the changes album to album and to employ that sort of analytical lens that Tudal brings to his own work, and to see an artist change so much in so little time, and to hear him innovate upon his own sound, his own ideas, and to see what changes album to album, year to year, decade to decade. It's truly, it was truly a really cool experience. It gave me a far deeper appreciation for Prince, especially his eras and albums that were not nearly as critically or commercially as successful as the mid to late 80s. No matter whether you like all of his records or not, Prince never stopped innovating. He never stopped challenging himself. And to a certain extent, he never stopped challenging his listeners. It's a really cool experience, and I would greatly recommend that if you have a favorite artist, an artist that you love, take the time to go through their work chronologically. It's a really eye-opening experience just to hear almost as it's as firsthand as you can get, to hear that artist grow and develop over time. It's a truly fulfilling experience, especially if you're looking at an artist that you absolutely love. I would definitely recommend doing this. Turning our attention to the albums that came out in 2022, the albums that I could not get enough of, there were 3 in particular that immediately come to mind. These 3 albums were a constant repeat throughout the length of the year. I've got them all on vinyl. If you got into my car at any point, there's a very good chance that I was listening to one of these 3 albums. I was absolutely consumed by these 3 records. The first 2 of these 3 records were the pair of double albums from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. First, Unlimited Love, followed by Return of the Dream Canteen. In between those 2 albums came the release of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers by the unprecedented Kendrick Lamar. These are the 3 albums that I could not get enough of in 2022. We'll begin by looking at the massive year that the Red Hot Chili Peppers had, arguably one of the biggest in their near 40-year career. 2022 saw the return of John Frusciante, their longtime guitar player, the guitarist that out of all the incredible guitar players they've had over the years, the one that everyone loves the most, the one that's on the classic records, the one that continues to challenge the band in ways that no one else could. This was the 3rd coming of John Frusciante. Now, I can't think of any other examples. I'm sure there are, but I cannot think of another band where a crucial member has left the band not once, but twice, and then has returned for a 3rd time. Of course, John Frusciante joins the Red Hot Chili Peppers in 1988 for the recording of Mother's Milk, and then records Blood Sugar Sex Magic, arguably their greatest artistic statement to date, the seminal record that saw the band shoot from unknown underground cult club phenomenon to one of the biggest bands of the 1990s. He departs shortly after that tour and is then replaced by Dave Navarro of Jane's Addiction for One Hot Minute. Hot take, I think Dave Navarro and One Hot Minute was a spectacular record, and I think Navarro was an incredible addition to the band. I am positive we'll do an episode looking at this particular album. But I digress. Frusciante then returns for the creation of Californication, another record that people often consider to be the greatest work from the band, and he stays until the tour, the Stadium Arcadium tour. At the conclusion of that tour is when he departs once again, which is where his protege, Josh Klinghoffer, joins the band for a pair of albums throughout the 2010s, I'm With You, followed by The Getaway. I think where Frusciante had already departed the band once, there was a sense of finality to when he parted ways with them again following the conclusion of the Stadium Arcadium tour. It truly seemed like that was the last we would see of Frusciante with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He wanted to go off and explore other artistic directions with electronic music. And Josh Klinghoffer, who had been touring with the band as a backup rhythm guitar player, was set to take center stage with the rest of the band. It seemed like a passing of the torch moment. It seemed final. And when the news broke in late 2019, early 2020, that John was set to return with the band and that they were making new music, it almost didn't seem real. Of course, now we know that this was real, and it was what a return it was. Unlimited Love was released on April 1st, 2022. The first album to feature John Frusciante on guitar since 2006. And what an album it was. The record was full of poppy funk rock. It felt organic. It felt natural. The chemistry between the band did not feel like that of a group that had been disbanded with this guitar player for as long as they did. It almost felt like the direct continuation to Stadium Arcadium. Its pop sensibilities led itself to lean a little closer to By the Way. It was a very mainstream album, and what I loved about it was that it had these little twists and turns, these creative dive bombs that kind of came out of nowhere and really just, as mainstream as the album was, there was a sense of artistic curiosity to their performance and songwriting that I absolutely adored. I think the greatest example of sheer weirdness on this album comes from Bastards of Light, a song that is accented by this pulsing synth pattern in the verse, followed by this almost George Harrison reminiscent slide on the guitar going into an acoustic chorus. The song itself, to me, immediately felt like a David Bowie track. And it's not the kind of song you would expect from this band. It's definitely a moment on the album that's creativity for the sake of creativity. Other highlights, of course, include the opening song and lead single Black Summer, the funky aquatic mouth dance. The Great Apes is a fantastic modern alternative rock track. She's a Lover is just super, super groovy. And similar to One Way Traffic, it's bumping. And Frusciante's lead vocals on The Heavy Wing are fantastic. In every regard, if the Red Hot Chili Peppers had only released Unlimited Love in 2022, they would have made the comeback that they needed. They would have sold out their tour. I mean, maybe not sold out. They were playing like massive arenas, bigger than stadiums, right? I saw them at the Rogers Centre in Toronto, which you're looking at 40 to 50,000 people. But I digress. The year would have been, as big as it could have been with just one double album and a massive stadium tour. And that is where things just continue to get better and better for anyone that's a Chili Pepper fan. Shortly after their tour had already commenced, they announced the release of Return of the Dream Canteen, which was set for a fall 2022 release date. This was yet another double album. And if you listen to any of the podcasts featuring Rick Rubin or anyone else that's kind of surrounded the release of Unlimited Love, there's enough material for a third double album from these same sessions, which is incredible. I believe Rubin, I cannot remember which podcast this was in, but he teased that it was some of his favorite material that actually got left behind. It is unreleased. Is it too much to ask for a third double album in 2 years? Maybe, but here's hoping. Return of the Dream Canteen dropped on October 14th, 2022, and if Unlimited Love was how you make a safe and massive comeback, Return of the Dream Canteen was a record front to back of experimentation. The Red Hot Chili Peppers, of course, are an alternative rock band. They pioneered, along with many other artists, the alternative scene in Los Angeles in the clubs back in the 1980s. And this album, to me, while very melodic, felt like a callback of just writing songs that they felt needed to be written for the sake of writing them and experimenting them. Once again, if Unlimited Love was the comeback, this almost feels like the album that they truly wanted to make. And upon seeing the success and reception of Unlimited Love, it felt safe to release this record following the return of Frusciante, following the release. It just made sense to drop it the way they did. Tip of My Tongue and Eddie were the lead singles, and they are probably the most mainstream songs out there. Tip of My Tongue is a little bit of hard funk. Eddie, a tribute to Eddie Van Halen, is just this really melodic, groovy ballad, and Frusciante's solo at the end it's just such a Frusciante take on the techniques and trademarks of Eddie Van Halen's style that he weaves together in a way that's just entirely original but entirely nostalgic for Eddie Van Halen. Fake as Fuck is another really cool track. My Cigarette with the Drum Machine really took me for a loop, but it's a song that I've come to appreciate quite a bit. Towards the end, you've got a couple of songs that are just fantastic. Bag of Grins with its sinister Alice in Chains vibe and the use of a bridge that then comes back in the second half of the final chorus, leading into an outro, was just fantastic songwriting, and just to play with the structure in that way was incredible. Copperbelly might be my new favorite Chad Smith groove. It's just a ton of fun playing in 3/4 that way. Carry Me Home, the Hendrixy blues number that is the penultimate song on the record, is just, Frusciante teases this style every now and then in his solos, and to hear the band indulge in just a classic 60s blues song like this was amazing. And the spoken word outro of the closing track, In the Snow, is just another great moment. The artistry of this band is just so uncomparable, especially on this record. The chemistry between all four musicians as they're all performing at their top level, it's incredible. And to see how these two almost conflicting albums complement each other, right? Return of the Dream Canteen could not soar without the groundwork and foundation of Unlimited Love. Just like musically, these two albums showcase the band as a powerful force that can play to a mainstream, more melodic, more pop-toned record, as well as digging deep into their alternative roots and really challenging themselves as musicians and going into directions that they still haven't traversed in 4 decades. It's truly incredible to witness, and both of these albums were among my absolute favorites for the year. Perhaps the biggest global release, the most anticipated album to drop last year, was Kendrick Lamar's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. It is undeniable that Kendrick is among the greatest artists of his time. It is undeniable that he remains one of pop culture's most captivating figures of the 2010s and currently the 2020s, which is why Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers was such a highly anticipated release. The album, of course, follows the release of Damn 5 years later. It's very rare in any era that an artist who is as big as Kendrick is in regards to the cultural context It's very rare that someone takes that long in between records. And I think that just kind of furthers Kendrick's artistic enigma. He's a character. He's one of the last few mysteries of pop culture, and that's what makes him so interesting. And that's beyond the fact that his music is pivotal and innovative to the hip hop genre. There is a curiosity to what Kendrick will do and what he will reveal about himself. In that context, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is his most revealing album to date. It's an incredibly vulnerable album. It's truthful. It's from the heart. And rather than looking at a wider scope as he's done on previous albums, right? Looking at Black America as a whole, looking at Black culture within the systemic oppression of white America. He's looking at himself. He's looking at his reputation, some of which he's earned and some of which has been given to him by his fans and his audience. He's looking at his failures as a husband, his failures as a father, and he's really digging into his own humanity and almost working through his own therapy through the studio process. It's a fascinating album. And it's a dangerous album in the sense that there was very little lead up to its release. And beyond that, there's, as the kids would say, there's a lack of bangers on the album. And that feels too intentional to be overlooked. The record, thrives on slower tempos, less aggressive beats. It thrives on these songs that don't feel like traditional hip hop or, hip hop of the last decade or whatever's going on right now. The album itself is risky. It's Kendrick performing on a high wire without a net. And in my books, he succeeded. Is it To Pimp a Butterfly? No. I don't think there will ever be another To Pimp a Butterfly from Kendrick or from any other artist. It's very rare that an album comes out of that level of greatness. It's very rare that an album is then duplicated. We could only climb Everest once. And I think Kendrick knows that, and I think he's okay with that, and he's exploring his creativity in different avenues and in different ways. The resulting Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is just yet another evolution to his sound, his creative palette, and the album is fantastic, I think. Highlights on the album include N95 and Worldwide Steppers. Both of those songs have fantastic beats to them. The Ghostface feature on Purple Hearts was a welcomed addition. Kendrick, of course, doesn't tend to use a lot of features, so throwing that to Ghostface was really cool and well-deserved. Crown is almost like a mantra of a song. It's so anti-hip-hop in every way, and it's so emotional. It's so from the heart. It's so authentic. Silent Hill is another great one. Savior and the title track, Mr. Morale, are all musical highlights on this album. And of course, I'm hesitant to include The Heart Part 5, the single that led up to the album but wasn't actually on the record upon its initial release. The Heart Part 5 is jazzy, it's funky, it feels like 70s proto-disco. It's a lot of fun, and hearing that song just a couple of days before Mr. Morale, I was really hoping that was the direction that Kendrick was going to take on his newest album. And while he didn't, we can still long for that creative direction to be explored further. Beyond those 3 albums, there were quite a few other records that certainly turned the needle for myself. The first one that comes to mind would be Fantastic Negrito's White Jesus, Black Problems. I actually had the pleasure of speaking to Fantastic Negrito about his record. I interviewed him for The Spill magazine, and it's such an incredible story. The album itself is a concept album that follows the true story of his however many generations ago grandmother, a white woman who illegally married a runaway slave in the South. And this was new to him. He had recently discovered this through his own genealogy. This was a story he didn't know existed. And he was so moved by the courage of his grandparents of however many generations ago. He was so moved by their courage and their love and their passion that he created this entire album telling their story. Musically, White Jesus Black Problems is probably the most organic fusion album I've ever heard in my life. And it's not fusion in the traditional jazz fusion context, but it's a pop album. It's a blues album. It's a little bit of jazz and ragtime. It's funk. It's gospel. It's a little bit of rock. It's all of these things in one, and it's, to a certain extent, it's none of these things. It's a complete rejection of any sort of genre or categorization. You cannot even attempt to put this album in a box. And I am confident that the artistry, the creativity of Fantastic Negrito truly knows no bounds. Of course, the reunion of Alexis on Fire and their album Otherness is something you could not have missed. Living in Ontario, it's probably illegal to have not been swept up in this wave and to not have been fully engrossed in what the band was doing. It was such a refined take on their classic sound. It truly reflected a band that has been through it all and gotten back together and has just focused on their songwriting and telling, expressing their creative voice in a way that is authentic to where they are in their lives now. Shout out to Alexis on Fire for that one. There are a pair of releases from local Toronto bands, artists that I've had the pleasure of sharing the stage with and can happily call friends, that truly stood out. The first comes from Drop Top Alibi, their album Anyways, recorded largely live off the floor. This was a super grungy approach to their music. As an album, front to back, there's not a song on here I would skip. The opening song and lead single, Dill Song, is an incredible riff, one of their coolest for sure. And Concrete Souls just feels like, that early grunge era Seattle, 92. So heavy, so dark. This is a fantastic record. And while the band has always employed slightly alternative, slightly grungy tones in their music, it was really cool to kind of watch them go headfirst into that direction rather than allude to it. And they celebrated the release of the album last November with a performance at the Bovine Sex Club, which hands down is among the greatest concerts I've seen from a local band, perhaps ever. It was an incredible performance. I've never seen an audience engage with a local band at that level, and I'm absolutely stoked to see where this record goes for the band and what else is to come from Drop Top Alibi. Around the same time, hardcore band Conversation and 2022 Rock Search winners, 97.7 Hits FM Rock Search winners, Conversation released Honesty, which was a collection of their two previous EPs released as one full-length album, along with the release of a new song, As the Oceans Moved. It was just really cool to hear these songs put together, and not one EP followed by the next. They reorganized the track listing, and it just felt like an organic, cohesive album, something that was almost always meant to be, and it just added a little more context and resonance for their music. Additional album highlights of the year: Alter Bridge, Pawns and Kings, Nas, King's Disease 3, Black Thought and Danger Mouse's collaborative album, Cheat Codes, The Rolling Stones, El Macambo, 1977, and Eddie Vedder's Earthlings. All of these records were just, they stood out from everything else that was coming out. It really was a great year for new releases. The year also featured a number of singles that were not associated with albums. The first that come to mind were a pair of singles from Killer Mike, Run and Talking That Shit. Of course, these two singles now led into his recent release, Michael, a truly stunning record for 2023. But as singles go, Run and Talking That Shit, it was just so exciting to hear Killer Mike return to his solo music and to do so proficiently as hip-hop's arguably most prolific rapper. Another local artist who won a band that I absolutely love, the Jailbirds, released a song called Sludge. I remember years ago, their lead guitar player and singer Mike Penny had sent me a demo of this, and the riff is one of their best, and I've just been waiting for this song to be released, and it was a really good day. It was a really good day when they finally dropped this one, another great song from the Jailbirds. On top of their double albums, the Red Hot Chili Peppers released two singles, one following each record. The first was Nerve Flip following Unlimited Love. This was almost like a garage rock throwback to the 90s. And following Return of the Dream Canteen came The Shape I'm Taking, another sort of alternative rock track that would have fit perfectly on the album. These were two singles that in both cases, I don't know why they did not make the final album, but if they are inklings to what has been left behind for that third double album, I am very excited at the slightest possibility that we might hear more. The final track from 2022 that I want to talk about is We Ain't Came to Lose from Raekwon and Ghostface Killah. The song was created for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge video game. The game in itself was a total throwback to those old arcade games you'd play in the 90s, and to hear Ghost and Ray back together again on a super classic hip-hop beat, it's just very reminiscent to eating greasy pizza and just throwing your quarters away at a machine to see Leonardo take on Shredder. All around 10 out of 10 song, 10 out of 10 game. Anything Wu-Tang and the Turts, I am so there. Additionally, 2022 was a great year for musical discoveries. I really got into some jazz fusion that I otherwise had not heard of, starting with Sons of Kemet, an English jazz fusion band. Their album, Your Queen is a Reptile, was just super cool. And this connects to the next artist. Their drummer's name is Tom Skinner, who plays drums in this new band called The Smile. The Smile, of course, featuring Tom York and Johnny Greenwood of Radiohead, which is a super cool band. I've never really been a huge Radiohead fan, and not that I don't like them. I sincerely feel that I'm missing out on something. But The Smile is oddly the most Radiohead thing I've ever heard, but also the least. And the contributions of Skinner on drums just makes for a really cool, almost jazzy, almost funky take on Radiohead. On the hip-hop front, I really got into Czarface. They are among my favorite rap groups currently. I'm almost constantly listening to a different Czarface record here and there, especially their collaborations with MF Doom, which is just peak. It's a throwback to Wu-Tang time. It's a throwback to classic hip-hop, fun samples, goofy comic book references and ethos, but it's all supported by just, top-tier rapping. Check out Czarface if you haven't. It's super alternative rap, and it's awesome. I think the most prolific and final discovery that I really dug into last year was the Afrobeat genre, and that starts with Fela Kuti, arguably the originator of the Afrobeat genre. Now, for those who don't know, Afrobeat is the combination of jazz and blues, translated American jazz and blues, then adapted by at first Nigerian artists, but largely just as a whole African artists, reinterpreting the music of African Americans. So Afrobeat is this cross-pollinization, this globalization of music from one culture and country reaching back into Nigeria. Fela Kuti is arguably the first to really take on this genre. And it's a genre that I've heard of. It's just one that I've never really listened to. I've never given much attention to it. But his album Expensive Shit is incredible. His work with drummer Tony Allen is just revolutionary to the genre. You'll be listening to it, and as a jazz drummer, you'll be blown away by what's going on, and it plays with what you expect from American jazz and American funk and blues, just in ways that are so unprecedented. There's so many left turns that someone like James Brown or George Clinton or Coltrane and Ellington wouldn't have taken. It's a fantastic trip, and when the Spotify algorithm hits right, it hits right. And Afrobeat and Fela Kuti was a truly musical, a truly invigorating experience, one that I am still slowly digging into today. And there you have it. That was my 2022 in music. I cannot believe you made it to the end of that. And if you did, you are the real MVP. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of Beats by Ger. I look forward to sharing more ideas and thoughts on music with you as we go week to week. Follow me up on Instagram and TikTok at Beats by Ger, and let me know in the comments what albums, what songs, and what artists you also couldn't get enough of last year. Let me know. Maybe I missed something. Maybe there's something new that I need to check out. Once again, thank you very much. I'm your host, Jared Harris, and this has been Beats by Ger.